And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is March the 16th, the 75th day of this new year. Just 290 days remain to the year's over with, and we'll be doing it again. Well, I've been doing almost 1,400 episodes of this show. And one thing I've had in every episode is holidays and observances. And I've had some criticism because there are those that said, I don't care. I want to hear more about the stories. Well, there are also those that say, we'd like to know what the days are. So I'm going to give an abbreviated version, and we're going to move on to some other topics. It's National Panda Day. That's an important day. Nature's cuddly ambassadors have a diet that's 99% bamboo and an unmistakable appearance that's sure to melt your heart. It's Black Press Day, Girl Crush Day, and what's called Welderly Day, which celebrates the elderly members of our society. And it's Robert Goddard Day. Very important individual. And lest we forget, it's also Ramadan, which goes on through March the 19th. It's the Muslim holy month, where the Muslims fast from sunrise to sunset, focusing on spiritual reflection and community. Famous people born on this date, we've got two of them, Lauren Graham and James Madison. Well, for the last over 2 weeks, we've had a war going on in the Middle East. And Iran is being pounded into the sand for some of their activities. But the interesting thing is, we've got more people here and in places like Britain that support Iran than people in Iran do. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. President Trump says Iran is decimated, but he's not declared the war is over yet. He demands Iran surrender. It says he's hearing the new leader's dead. The Gulf countries neighboring Iran have reported new attacks yesterday, a day after the regime accused the U.S. of using ports and docks and hideouts in the United Arab Emirates to launch strikes on Kharg Island. That's home to the main terminal handling Iran's oil exports. President Trump said Friday the U.S. had carried out a bombing raid on Iran's Kharg Island, a strategically vital island in the Persian Gulf that serves as that country's largest oil terminal and a crucial hub for its crude exports. The conflict in the Middle East is certainly rattling global energy markets, raising fresh fears about the security of the Straits of Hormuz, the world's most important oil choke point. State Department announced it's offering a $10 million reward for information about Iran's new supreme leader, Mujtaba Khamenei, and key leaders of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and its component branches. Secretary of War Hegseth said Friday at the Pentagon that U.S. forces are decimating the radical Iranian regime's military, and that Khamenei, the son of the late Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was injured and likely disfigured. Well, also claimed we've wiped out Iran's air defenses, but they still have missiles to launch. Well, an Arizona man who admitted to crucifying a pastor, asked for the death penalty so we can move on with our lives. He's accused of crucifying a pastor and putting a crown of thorns on the victim's head, and he's requested a death penalty so everybody can move on. Adam Schiff, who's representing himself, asked the judge last week to allow him to enter a guilty plea so the case can wrap up quickly, saying the legal system was dragging this out. That's according to Fox 10. He's 51. He's accused of murdering William Schoenemann, pastor of the New River Bible Chapel, in April 2025 before mutilating the man's body. Schoenemann was found dead with his arms spread out on his bed and hands pinned to the wall. The suspect previously confessed to the crime and has never claimed to be innocent. From day one, he said he's done it. And he said there are reasons he did it, and he's not contesting anything. He said that in open court on Thursday. And his speedy trial rights went on from 5 months to basically 2.5 years, and we're dragging this out in the interest of justice. But what about the victims' families? What about him? What about his own family? We want closure so we can move on with our lives, he said. So he's asked for the death penalty. Well, the woman accused of a fatal hit and run that killed an 8-year-old laughing during her first court appearance. Florida woman accused of fleeing a crash that killed an 8-year-old boy was seen shaking her head and laughing during her first court appearance Friday. So, as a judge read the charges against her via video conference. Polk County Sheriff's Office said 30-year-old Victoria Johnson of Winter Haven, Florida, was arrested Thursday and charged with leaving the scene of a crash involving a death, leaving the scene of a crash with serious bodily injury and tampering with evidence, driving without a license, causing death, and giving false information to law enforcement officials. She appeared in front of a judge Friday during the first appearance hearing held by video conference where the charges are formally read. And during that hearing, she shook her head and was seen laughing on video as the judge read those charges. After appearing to laugh in disbelief, Johnson was heard to say, "I wasn't even in the car." She was then told not to speak about the facts of her case before the judge asked whether she wanted to return Saturday for a continuation of the after securing an attorney. She said, "I don't know which one's better." Judge said, "I can't give you advice. I'll appoint the public defender today if you want me to." So she said, "Yes, please." Well, it was before 8:30 p.m. on Wednesday that deputies got a 911 call from Faith Baptist Church in Winter Haven reporting 2 boys had been run over by a vehicle before the driver fled the scene. They were at a church event attempting to cross Crystal Beach Road when they were hit by a northbound vehicle. One 8-year-old boy died from his injuries. The 10-year-old boy suffered a broken arm, broken femur, and compound skull fracture and remains hospitalized in critical but stable condition. Witnesses described the vehicle as a dark-colored mini-side SUV, and parts found at the crash scene were consistent with the lower portion of that vehicle. Surveillance video from the area showed a truck traveling southbound and another vehicle traveling north. Audio from the footage suggested something was struck by the second vehicle before it was seen turning east. Well, investigators later learned Johnson had called the authorities to report her dark blue 2009 Hyundai Santa Fe stolen. When the deputies found her family, she initially claimed the vehicle had been stolen the night before. Later told deputies she had loaned the SUV to somebody who didn't return it before admitting she had been driving Wednesday night and that she thought she might have hit somebody. Well, deputies transported her to a substation for questioning. And they spotted the SUV driven by Corey Stewart, a man she told investigators she'd given the vehicle to get rid of. Well, sometimes stories just don't hang together. Well, we got the 2026 Oscars. They're a bunch of winners and losers. It's the 98 Academy Awards. Taking center stage Sunday night as the film industry's biggest stars gather in Los Angeles to celebrate the year in movies. Celebrities included Nicole Kidman, Demi Moore, Kate Hudson. They arrived at the Dolby Theater ahead of the ceremony, which recognizes standout performances, directing and filmmaking in Hollywood. The Best Supporting Actress, Ellie Fanning in Sentimental Value. Inga Ibsdottir, Lilias in Sentimental Value. Amy Madigan in Weapons was the winner. Wunmi Mosaka in Sinners. Teyana Taylor, One Battle After Another. Now, Best Animated Feature had Arco in Neon and Elio and Disney Pixar. K-pop Demon Hunters and Netflix was the winner. Little Amelia, the character of Rain, G-Kids. Zootopia 2 and Disney. Best Animated Short. That was won by The Girl Who Cried Pearls. Best Costume Design came from Frankenstein with Kate Hawley, who was the winner. Best Makeup and Hairstyling, Frankenstein was the winner again. Best Casting, One Battle After Another. Cassandra Kulukundis was the winner. Best Live Action Short. There was a tie in that particular one. The Singers and Two People Exchanging Saliva. Best Supporting Actor, Sean Penn, One Battle After Another was the winner. Best Adapted Screenplay, One Battle After Another, Paul Thomas Anderson was the winner. Best Original Screenplay, Sinners, by Ryan Coogler was the winner. Best Production Design, Frankenstein was the winner. Best Visual Effects, Avatar, Fire and Ash was the winner. Best Documentary Short, All the Empty Rooms was the winner. And there was a long list of categories. And unfortunately, many of the winners, when they came up to get their trophy, had to make their little political speech, which is expected of winners of the Oscars. What they don't seem to understand, people watch the Oscars to be entertained, not to hear political speeches. We don't care what you think. Well, there's been a crackdown in spring break activities. Southern towns have rolled out alcohol bans and new restrictions. Certain popular spring break destinations are introducing stricter rules ahead of the busy travel season. Panama City Beach, Florida, where I had the opportunity to enjoy several summers there when my parents owned a motel. Officials have approved temporary overnight beach closures as part of the city's spring break safety plan. Closures run from March 12th or April 30th. Certain sections of the beach close nightly between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. That's according to the Panama City Beach official website. Measures intended to prevent large crowds from gathering late at night and allow officers to patrol other areas during the peak tourism period, according to the website. Police Chief J.R. Talamantez said the rules are meant to help maintain order while welcoming visitors to the popular Gulf Coast destination. I can remember some of the crazy activities that took place during spring break. We used to sit and watch with total fascination at some of the craziness that took place. Well, foreigners are snapping up U.S. homes and stealing the American dream out from under families. President Trump is pushing hard for Congress to ban Wall Street firms from buying single-family homes. He's worried that financial tycoons are crowding out younger and middle-class homebuyers, especially in fast-growing southern cities. There's another kind of homebuyer the president and Congress should cut off at the pass, and that's foreigners who are blocking their own citizens from the American dream. In a new paper, it was shown that foreign homebuyers are far more common than most people realize. Between April 2024 and March 2025 alone, foreigners purchased more than 78,000 American homes. And foreign home buying is becoming more common with every passing year. Between 2024 and 2025 alone, foreign buyers spent 33% more on U.S. homes than they did the previous year. And each home bought by somebody from outside the U.S. leaves one fewer home for Americans to buy. And that fact alone raises prices for first-time home buyers. Basically, it comes out to be Economics 101. But situation's even worse when you account for the fact that nearly half the foreigners paid all cash. Younger Americans and middle-class families simply can't compete with all cash offers, not if they're buying their first home. Well, Costco customers are fuming. They brought back the churros, but shoppers said the new version's a slap in the face. Costco's finally answered calls to bring back its beloved churros, but the shoppers aren't exactly satisfied. Instead of bringing back the full-size pastry that once defined its food court, the Washington-based big box store has unveiled a $2.99 caramel churro sundae topped with tiny churro bites. The dessert features vanilla, chocolate, or soft swirl ice cream that drizzled with salted caramel and topped with crunchy mini churro bites. Costco's original churros, fired dough typically rolled in cinnamon sugar, were a food court staple for decades. First appeared in the 1990s and sold for 99 cents, according to reports. Later reformulated and repriced before being discontinued in 2024. The Laura Jane Lamb, who runs the Instagram account Costco Hot Find, shared a video of the new dessert this week, writing the Costco food court did it again. Reaction online's been mixed, though. A comment of nearly 5,000 likes on Lamb's Instagram post read, "We don't want the bits of churro. We want the whole churro back." Well, unfortunately, I've seen this in many stores, if the people really like something, it's shortly discontinued or changed. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Well, over 2,000 flights were canceled in a single day, turning major airports into virtual ghost towns. Minneapolis-St. Paul International saw 73% of departing flights canceled with minimal staff on site. At least 2,000 flights were canceled on Sunday as winter blizzards continue to batter the upper Midwest, turning at least one normally bustling airport into a ghost town. According to the latest data from FlightAware, the U.S. flight cancellations Sunday accounted for roughly 78% of all canceled flights worldwide, with at least 2,216 flights grounded out of roughly 2,842 global cancellations. Meanwhile, an additional 6,826 delays have reportedly rippled across the national air network, further straining travel schedules around the world. And many airlines have since issued guidelines allowing passengers to change their flights without major fees, providing flexibility for travelers affected by winter storms. But the epicenter of the disruptions remains the Midwest, with the heaviest impact centered on Chicago, followed by Minneapolis. That fallout's created noticeable ripple effects at other major U.S. airports, including Atlanta and Denver. Well, hopefully we'll get back to normal. Well, there's a dementia village that could push Americans to rethink how we treat memory loss. Now, some Americans suffer from dementia and soon be able to walk into a grocery store and buy food. They'll be able to enjoy a meal out with friends or schedule an appointment at a local spa, that is. The nation's first dementia village is coming soon to Madison, Wisconsin. It's a $40 million project to be spread across 6 acres. It's going to feature a Main Street field with shops and a theater and arts and crafts center. That's according to a news release. It's slated to open up in 2027. Spearheaded by Grace, a nonprofit healthcare agency, the Dementia Village community is being modeled on the European arrangement of micro-towns that emerged across the globe. All too often, somebody enters memory care, their life gets smaller, and the way each day unfolds is regimented and uniform, according to Lynn Sexton, president and CEO of Grace. We want to give these people back their autonomy. Dementia Village could provide a blueprint for other communities across the U.S. as the country grapples with an estimated 7.2 million Americans aged 65 and older are living with significant memory loss, according to the Alzheimer's Association. Upcoming Wisconsin village is going to feature 8 households. Each will have private bedrooms and ensuite bathrooms and shared kitchens and living spaces. They're even going to include front porches so you can sit and enjoy the evening. Now, the goal is to get away from an overly scheduled routine often associated with nursing homes. A resident may think I was supposed to go play mahjong today, but instead I feel like just sitting around reading the newspaper or working on a puzzle. Village is expected to house up to 65 full-time residents. We'll see if that has any success. Well, a former substitute teacher and a boyfriend face 38 child sex charges as the bond nears $9 million. Former Texas substitute teacher and her boyfriend are now facing a combined 38 child sex crime charges, with their bond set at nearly $9 million. Madison Page Jones, a former substitute teacher in the Midlothian Independent School District, and her boyfriend, Zachary Donlinger, are first arrested in December after Midlothian police launched an investigation into allegations involving a 5-year-old child who lived in Jones's home. Jones's bond was initially set at $90,000, and Donlinger's initially reported at $250,000, but after the additional charges were filed earlier this month, the bonds increased dramatically. Jones faces 13 counts of aggravated sexual assault of a child, 1 count of possession of child pornography, 2 counts of indecency with a child involving sexual contact, and 3 counts of indecency with a child involving exposure. And Donlinger faces 1 count of sexual performance by a child under the age of 14, 13 counts of aggravated sexual assault of a child, 2 counts of indecency with a child involving sexual contact, 3 counts of indecency with a child involving exposure, and 1 felony warrant. His bond alone is now $5 million. Jones's bond stands at $3.8 million. Well, NBC News affiliate Channel 10 in Amarillo reported the court documents show Midlothian police were called to the home of a woman December 17th who identified herself as a friend of Jones. The woman told officers she was concerned about Donlinger's behavior toward a 5-year-old child who lived in Jones's home. Jones and Donlinger were in a relationship at the time, and things spiraled out of control from there. A Hawaii Democrat revealed why she stayed seated during Trump's viral State of the Union moment about prioritizing Americans. Representative Jill Taduko, Democrat of Hawaii, said she had no hesitation about remaining in her seat in the 2026 State of the Union when President Trump challenged lawmakers to stand if they agreed the U.S. government should prioritize its citizens' safety over that of illegal aliens. Like every single one of her Democratic colleagues, Takuda is a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Stayed put as Republicans stood for over a minute and a half, applauding in a show of support for the president's statement. The voter approached Takuda about the moment 2 weeks later, asking why she didn't stand up. The statement was the first duty of the American government to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens. I noticed you didn't stand. The voter challenged the elected official. After a brief smattering of applause from the audience, Takuda thanked Arlene for the question, noting that lawmakers don't always get easy questions at town hall events. But she said that decision was easy for her. She said her reaction was based on her interpretation of Trump's challenge, stating she believed the president had no intention of fielding the support for the statement. If it had been a genuine question, a true question, not a ploy to be able to put on some commercial later on to say, look at all those Democrats don't believe in protecting Americans, actually would have stood. Well, the problem is that in order to make themselves look good, they changed the entire scenario. Well, a lost city has been found in the forest. Archaeologists uncovered a lost medieval city that vanished without a trace. They said it was a true time capsule. It was found in a remote forest. New evidence is revealing what the city looked like before its sudden decline. Researchers uncovered the remains of Stolzenberg, a medieval town that appears to have collapsed in the 14th or 15th century in a forest outside the modern-day Polish village of Solibor. The city is founded on the border of Pomerania and Neumark, a historically contested border region between Germany and Poland. Well, the more digging that goes on, the more that is found. Well, we're going to go to our main topic today. You know, one topic folks don't get tired of hearing about is the fate of the individual known as the People's Princess, Princess Diana. She was a modern-day princess, the wife of Prince, now King Charles, and beloved by many people. She was a captivating combination of her stunning features with her charming personality. Extremely popular with the public. She was said to be perfect for her role as the future queen. But unfortunately, things didn't work out between her and Charles. The couple split up, went their separate ways. Turns out Charles was having an affair the entire time with Camilla Parker Bowles, who is now the queen. After the split, Diana was said to be somewhat adrift. But even so, she was still routinely in the headlines, not necessarily because she did anything to merit him, but simply because paparazzi news hounds were constantly following her every movement in order to make the headlines. She was, in fact, fleeing from the paparazzi press when she met with her tragic accident that resulted in her death. But of course, not everybody believes it was an accident. It seems almost as soon as the news of her death broke, there were folks out there suggesting maybe it wasn't an accident at all. Maybe she was murdered. And we're actually in the process of putting together a book on that. In fact, we've written, as of yesterday, we've published 125. And if you want to see many of them, you can go to Amazon Kindle, or you can go to hudnallfiles.com. We're going to try to get all of them on Hudnall Files, but right now you can just see the majority of them on Amazon. You know, Diana wasn't the only person to die that night. The boyfriend she was seeing at the time, Dodi Fayed, was also killed. His wealthy and well-connected father, Mohammed Al Fayed, was devastated by the loss, of course, and he too became an early proponent of the Princess Diana conspiracy. Mohammed was interested in knowing more about what the British intelligence community might know about Diana and Dodi's death. In fact, he wondered if British intelligence might have been involved in it. His determined interest to dig up information on this topic, though, led to a less than scrupulous character from Austria who crafted a bogus set of paperwork and falsely attributed it to the intelligence community. Rather than linking British intelligence, though, it seemed to link American intelligence in the form of the CIA. American CIA, of course, denied any involvement in Diana's death, but for conspiracy theorists, denial is a funny way of seeming like an admission. Those who wanted to believe that there was a conspiracy afoot would expect the CIA to deny involvement. They certainly wouldn't admit it, of course. At least that's how a conspiracy theorist's mind seems to work. It was August 31st, 1997. That was the day that Princess Diana was killed, whether by accident or not. She was in Paris at the time, enjoying an evening with her boyfriend, Dodi. Just finished a dinner at the fancy Ritz-Carlton, which Dodi's father owned in Paris, when they tried to make a quick exit in order to avoid the press. The press had already caught wind of Diana's evening location, but the couple had a plan to sneak out the back and quietly slip away. Unfortunately, as soon as they made their exit, the press discovered they were leaving and swarmed all over them. This led to a rushed, haphazard exit as Diana and Dodi's driver, a guy by the name of Henri Paul, sped off. Beside the frenzied way the group left, Henri Paul himself was a little rattled. Later he found out that he'd been drinking as well as taking antidepressants that night, which many believe that likely clouded his judgment. And he didn't seem to worry about the speed limit either, as he rocketed out of the hotel parking lot with paparazzi in full pursuit. Might have left the reporters in the dust, but he swerved into a tunnel. And at that point, according to the story, he lost control of the car. Ultimately, everybody in the car that day would die except for one person, a guy by the name of Reese Jones, who ironically was the only one of the bunch who had been wearing a seatbelt. He was actually a security guard whose job was to look out for the princess. Sadly, the paparazzi did catch up to their prey, only to find that they were mostly dead or dying. And even before the police could get there, some were snapping a few final photos. This was a sad end of Diana, who ultimately couldn't outrun the press. But even if you were to believe the conspiracy theories that claimed her death was somehow deliberate, you have to ask the question, why would she be singled out for death? One of the most common motives given is pure and simple prejudice. Some claim that the royal family feared Diana becoming deeply involved with Dodi because he was of an Islamic background. This claim insists that the royals were aghast at the notion she might marry and maybe even produce children with Dodi, bringing an Islamic influence into the royal family. Now, this theory is promoted early on by conspiracy theorist and researcher Sherman Skolnick. Mr. Skolnick claims that the British royal family had already been rocked by the painful divorce of Diana and Charles, and they were already at their wits' end and simply couldn't tolerate Diana remarrying Dodi, thus making a Muslim man Prince William and Prince Harry's stepfather. Another popular theory is one which involves the idea that Princess Diana was bumped off at the behest of Charles simply so he'd be able to marry his own longtime girlfriend, Camilla Parker Bowles, without his ex-wife Diana complicating things. Well, Princess Diana's tragic death still remains a source of much conspiratorial chatter. One story I heard was that en route to the hospital, her ambulance stopped on the side of the road for over half hour, during which time she eventually expired. You would think she'd have been rushed immediately to the closest medical facility, but she wasn't. It raised a lot of interesting questions. Well, the rise of AI has given rise to a lot of interesting conspiracy theories. There's one that I heard that's absolutely fascinating. The conspiracy of AI and the dead internet. The idea the entire universe is a simulation is frightening, of course, but the conspiratorial focus of this particular conspiracy theory is just as scary, even if it's a pared down version, so to speak. Because rather than arguing that all reality is a simulation, argues that the internet itself has become a fake, simulated experience produced by AI. That would mean that living users are no longer the main source of internet content. That the internet is actually dead, run not by the living, but by armies of cold, methodical bots. Since most of us can't avoid the internet in our daily lives, this theory is in many ways just about as distressing as the notion the entire universe is a massive simulation, which I heard a supposedly intelligent individual argue for several hours one night. Now, this particular theory about the dead internet began back in 2021 when somebody posted messages on the platform Macintosh Cafe. They created a thread they dubbed the dead internet theory. Then they went on to explain that the real internet, made up of communication between living and breathing users, essentially ceased to exist around 2016 or 2017, give or take a few months. The user insisted it was around this period that bots began to outnumber living users on the internet. For those of us who've scrolled through the comment sections to articles and have found that the same bizarre comments seem to be posted over and over on any particular given day, such a conspiracy theory may seem plausible enough. And there are indeed a lot of bots posting stuff on the internet. You couple that with advancements in AI, which can create deep fakes of what seem like real people saying real things, and we start to see just how problematic this whole matter can become. We can see how it might be increasingly difficult to determine whether the content we read and watch and listen to is from a living person or a non-living AI-generated bot. Even more alarming, even if bots are generating fake topics of discussion or interest, they can still become trendy. That means that an entirely fake narrative could be created, latched onto by consumers, go viral, and have the effect of influencing huge masses of people. But why might that be, you might ask? It's been claimed by adherents of this theory that maybe the U.S. government or some other nefarious force is behind all of this and what some have dubbed the gaslighting of the entire planet. Knowledge is power, and if the internet communication can easily push people's buttons through artificial constructs to influence your thinking and behavior, it's indeed scary. Because if you can influence perception, you essentially influence reality. Beside all-out totalitarian control over our perceived reality, another more prosaic reason for the influx of bots on an increasingly dead internet will be financial gain. Companies get increased revenue when more traffic comes to their site and their links get more clicks. This is the revenue structure, of course, that built Facebook. If it works for them, it works for everybody else. Doesn't really matter if the likes and clicks and reposts and comments and tweets are from real people or not. For an army of bots, posting on a site can indeed artificially boost its prominence. Of course, there are ethical efforts to eject the bots, but the gains are so tempting that companies continue to employ them regardless. In some ways, this theory is just as scary if it's not true as it is if it is true. Because if the internet has not been taken over by bots and all the outlandish posts we see can squarely be blamed on living, breathing human beings, then that in and of itself is a pretty scary reflection on the state of 21st century humanity. Well, let's turn from bots taking over the internet to talk about a conspiracy theory that I researched at some length. The story of cosmonauts lost in space. If the empty black void of outer space contained sound, we'd likely still hear the screams of cosmonauts echoing through it. For there are some rather terrible tales about how cosmonauts have met their demise in space. Now, Russia is so far the only country to officially record fatalities in space. And these fatalities include human cosmonauts as well as a Russian dog by the name of Laika. These known fatalities are bad enough, but could these official death counts only be the tip of the iceberg? Knowing the former Soviet Union's penchant for lying about death tolls, like they did with a famine in Ukraine, killed countless people back in the 1930s, it's hard to know for sure. Could very well be that some unknown cosmonauts whom we'll never have heard about may have lost their lives in space. If cosmonauts die, the mission's a failure, and the Russians don't like to admit failure. According to some conspiracy theories, there's a whole host of unfortunate cosmonauts who've been lost in space. This conspiracy began as early as 1959, when the Soviets, in their heady push to win the space race, were beset with a multitude of failures. Now, some of these were known because they couldn't always hide the spectacular sight of rockets blowing up on launch pads. Others, of course, were conveniently swept under the rug. Nevertheless, the more the Soviets tried to hide their mistakes, the more chatter there was about it. And the fact that Soviets are less honest about mishaps made folks wonder what else they might be hiding. So much so that some have wondered if Yuri Gagarin, who ventured into space in 1961, was really the first cosmonaut the Russians sent into space. Was he instead simply the first successful cosmonaut they put in space? Could there have been a few Yuris sent aloft in years prior who didn't make it back and might be hurtling still out in space? This theory is partially fueled by claims from ham radio operators who claim to have intercepted transmissions from these doomed cosmonauts. It's been claimed that these cosmonauts have been heard cursing and screaming and everything else as they came to realize the doomed status of their mission. Well, as it turns out, the Soviets have admitted to keeping some cosmonaut mishaps quiet. Valentin Bondarenko, for example, is a cosmonaut who died that same fateful year of 1961. And his death was indeed swept under the rug by the Soviets, but this would-be cosmonaut wasn't lost in space. It was lost during training. He was training in an oxygenated capsule in preparation for the real thing when he made the mistake of tossing a cotton swab soaked in alcohol-laced disinfectant onto the burner of an electric stove. It was a simple, absent-minded gesture, but it caused a spark, and when it struck the stove and in a pure oxygen environment, that little spark was all it took to cause the entire place to erupt in an inferno of fire. This cosmonaut was eventually pulled out, but amazingly, although burned to a crisp from head to toe, he didn't die immediately. He lived long enough to cry out, "It was all my fault. Don't blame anybody. It was all my fault." Now, if true, this demonstrates that Valentine was a caring, considerate man who fully knew what else was at stake. On the other side of the coin, he didn't want the Soviets to take revenge against any of his family if he made them look bad. Back in those days, it didn't take much to for inept technicians who botched flight tests to be sent to Siberia or even worse. And so it was that a selfless and heroic Valentine was seeking to shield his comrades from blame even with his last dying breath. As bad as this tragic episode with Valentine was, another mishap allegedly happened shortly after that to another cosmonaut, Vladimir Ilyushin. Excuse me. This cosmonaut said to have successfully hurtled up into space, but had to crash land in China. According to this part of the conspiracy theory, he survived, just barely, in a critical condition. Now, since the Soviets had an iron grip on the state-run media, they could control what was reported to the public, and that's what was reported to the world in general. So in order to avoid bad press, the Soviets decided to pretend that Ilyushin's mission never happened. A short time later, they launched Gagarin, who became the official first cosmonaut in space. Most startling part of this conspiracy theory, though, comes by way of a couple of Italian brothers, Achille and Giovanni Battista Giudica Cordiglia, who supposedly picked up a radio signal from a dying crew of cosmonauts. So how did they pick up this live feed from the Russians? So apparently they had put together a massively powerful homemade radio station in native Italy. The express purpose of tuning into the frequencies of the manned space launches that were taking place in the early days of the space race. Supposedly tuned into a frequency just in time to hear a bunch of panicked voices yelling in Russian. Some of the words that would then be translated included such things as "conditions growing worse, why don't you answer? Remember us to the motherland, we're lost, we're lost." So it was that the lost cosmonaut conspiracy theory was born and survives to this very day. Well, another topic that has gained a lot of interest over the years. What happened to Adolf Hitler? Did he actually commit suicide? Or did he escape and go to the Nazi secret base that's said to exist in Antarctica? According to the official theory, at the end of World War II, with Allied troops closing in on all sides of Adolf Hitler's bombed-out bunker, the Fuhrer made a fateful decision. With no way out of his intractable situation, put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger. Official history claims this is how both the war in Europe and Hitler came to an end. But there are conspiracy theories who have a different idea. They insist that Hitler had an escape plan that nobody knew about. It's claimed that he slipped out a hidden door and ventured through an underground tunnel, which led him to a plane waiting on the other side. And this plane took him to either Argentina or Antarctica, depending on which version of conspiracy theory you prefer to talk about. This conspiracy theory would claims that he went to Antarctica is the most outlandish. As most conspiracy theories tend to do, this theory is built around a kernel of known truth. That kernel of known truth is in regard to New Schwabenland, a very real Nazi Antarctic base that had been established just prior to the start of the war. It was in 1938. German polar explorer Alfred Reicher landed in a section of Antarctica known as Queen Maud Land. Did so at the behest of the German Society of Polar Research. Interestingly enough, just prior to the launch of this expedition, the group had reached out to American Arctic expert Admiral Richard E. Byrd, basically sought out his advice as a consultant. So, therefore, at least as it pertains to this conspiracy theory, extremely ironic that shortly after the war it was that same Richard Byrd who led the so-called Operation High Jump mission to Antarctica, which conspiracy theories believed was a mission to dismantle a surviving post-war Nazi holdout in Antarctica. And we've written a complete book on Operation High Jump. You can find it on Amazon, or you can go to hudnallfiles.com. Well, Byrd was initially contacted by the Germans before World War II had erupted, and at that time the Germans supposedly had a very prosaic reason for wanting a base in the frigid waste of Antarctica. They claimed they wanted to have a whaling station from which whales could be hunted for their blubber, and the Germans wanted to use the blubber as a substitute for butter. Did the Germans have a butter crisis? It does sound somewhat absurd, but in previous years, especially during the deprivation brought about by blockades during World War I, food staples such as butter had become rather scant. So Germany relied largely on exports to supply the German demand for this dairy good. Well, Germans do like their bread and they like their butter, and it was reason that rather than depend on foreign markets that were not always reliable, the Germans decided to create their own supply. And so it was that the Germans decided to get smart and corner the market of the best-known butter substitute known to man, whale blubber. It might sound quite gross to us today, but historically the oil from whale blubber had been used to make oil-based margarine as a substitute for butter. This was supposedly the official reason for the Germans going all out to create a base in the Antarctic region. Conspiracy theorists, though, contend the real reason for the base was not so much about butter as was about the Germans' desire to explore the interior reaches of the planet. Because the German High Command apparently believed completely in the hollow Earth theory. They believed the interior of the planet was hollow. Not only that, they also believed it was inhabited by an advanced civilization they wanted to make contact with. Although conspiratorial Germans were just going on a hunch, they pointed to the previous explorations of Antarctica, such as executed by British explorer James Waddell, whose report seemed to indicate that there were strange and mysteriously ice-free sections of the otherwise frozen continent. And there were Germans who believed that these ice-free zones just might have subterranean caverns that would lead to the hidden underground world, deep inside the hollow Earth. Now, all this might sound a bit much to get into, but according to the theory, Reicher's team did indeed find ice-free sections of Antarctica, and they did locate subterranean caverns, which they discovered had flowing water and plant life. It's also been alleged that the soil from which these plants grew was incredibly fertile, and abundance of crops could easily be grown in these hidden ice-free swaths of Antarctica. You have to understand that in those days, there were rabid believers in the hollow Earth theory. In fact, the U.S. government even paid for an expedition. Now, why were these areas ice-free, you might ask? According to legend, the reason is due to geothermal heating. These caverns were supposedly warmed by geothermal heat from the internal core of the Earth itself. Like a giant hot spring, the water that bubbled up was relaxingly warm, and like a sauna, heat radiated throughout the underground cave system, producing a temperate, warm climate at all times. But according to this rather wild conspiracy theory, this was not all the Germans discovered during their expedition. It's claimed they did indeed make contact with an advanced civilization which German conspiracy theorists had long suggested lived inside the interior of a hollow Earth. And if these were advanced beings, whatever they might have been, who supplied the Germans with cutting-edge technology, it supposedly included flying saucers. Well, this part of the story gets rather wild, but there were indeed rumors, even during the war, that a secret Nazi base had been become operational in Antarctica. In 1943, the Grand Admiral of Germany's Navy, Karl Donitz, went on the record to state the German submarine fleet's proud to have built for the Fuhrer and the other part of the world a Shangri-La on land, an impregnable fortress. Well, there was a lot of people believed this impregnable fortress was where Hitler escaped to after the war. The idea of submarines ushering the high-ranking Nazis to safety was actually feasible. Norwegian Nazi named Vidkun Quisling, in fact, once alluded to such things when during his trial for war crimes at Nuremberg, he stated he declined just such an invitation. According to what he said during his testimony, I believe I fought for a just cause and I refused to run away from my responsibilities when the Nazis, shortly after their final collapse, offered to convey me aboard a submarine to a safe refuge. Well, what safe refuge might he have been talking about? Many believe that it was to a safe refuge in a base hidden in Antarctica. According to conspiracy theorists, it was only after World War II officially ended that the Allied powers realized that a Nazi holdout still existed in Antarctica. This is where Admiral Byrd comes in once again, because it was Byrd who supposedly led the mission to take on this last vestige of Nazi power by way of Operation High Jump. Even though the government claimed it was a research operation, over 5,000 U.S. troops experienced in war from World War II were part of this operation. According to official history, this mission, which was launched in 1946, was nothing more than a training exercise to learn how a future military operation might operate in polar conditions. But the conspiracy theorists, of course, didn't believe that. They insisted this was nothing short of a mission to root out the Nazis from their hidden Antarctic base. Supposedly, this mission went down to the South Pole to confront the Nazis, but were beaten back by their advanced technology. Essentially another variation of the warned off the moon conspiracy, except in this case they were warned off the South Pole. Now, of course, this isn't the end of the story, because the efforts of Operation High Jump had apparently stirred up the Nazi hive. And the next year, 1947, strange craft began appearing in American skies, and what's gone down in history as the first wave of UFOs. This conspiracy theory contends these flying saucers that began to appear were actually Nazi-controlled craft that flew out of their hidden base in Antarctica to flaunt their aerial superiority over frustrated America. Now, this theory probably sounds ridiculous to most of us, but there's one rather odd potential link to this conspiracy of Nazi flying saucers hailing from a hidden Antarctic base to one of the most infamous alien abduction cases on record. I'm talking about the Betty and Barney Hill abduction case. It's considered one of the earliest documented abduction cases. One thing that stands out about it are pointed remarks made by Barney, who, while under hypnotic regression, while he was hypnotized, it was regressed to remember what happened. He began to insist that one of the alien captors looked like a Nazi. Someone wondered if maybe Barney didn't mean such things literally, but maybe he was just alluding to the militaristic precision and uniformity of the occupants of the UFO. But during the hypnosis session, which is recorded, you can clearly hear Barney's own astonishment as he shouts, "He's a Nazi, he's a German Nazi." Well, Barney himself was a World War II veteran, so he knew a thing or two about the Nazis. So did he really see one on board the craft? According to Nazi UFO-based theorists, that's indeed a possibility. And for those who are well-versed in UFO lore, it could also be that there were extraterrestrials who employed what's known as a screen memory. These ETs are said to have telepathic abilities to insert memories into the minds of humans and manipulate how they perceive things. And there are a lot of accounts of aliens suddenly altering how they appear to humans by way of this telepathic imagery. Usually, though, they do so to make themselves more pleasant and appealing in order to calm their rattled and terrified abductees down. So why would they reach into poor Barney's mind and basically introduce PTSD by projecting imagery of Nazis over themselves is anybody's guess. As it pertains to this particular conspiracy theory, according to conspiracy theorists, the Americans, unable to prevail by way of military force, decided instead to broker a deal with the Nazis and then into the underworld with whom the Nazis were allied. This particular theory also dovetails with the theory that the U.S. government entered into a secret treaty with non-human intelligence and agreed to let them experiment on Americans through alien abduction in exchange for their advanced technology. In fact, there has long been a story that President Eisenhower signed a treaty with the aliens. And where was Hitler in all this? Well, apparently he lived out his last years in peaceful seclusion, probably with plenty of whale blubber, butter, in his Antarctic subterranean sauna. Now, the more you delve down conspiracy theory rabbit holes, the more they seem to interconnect with a wide range of other conspiracy theories. And the Hitler escape, Nazi has a secret base in Antarctica is a perfect case in point. South Pole, whether it's cold or comfortably warm, would seem to be quite rich with conspiracy theory material. There's also been another story that, and we do know this is true, that quite a lot of senior Nazis did escape to Argentina. The Perones happily welcomed their technology and their assistance. And there was said to have been a ranch set aside for Hitler where he lived out his last days. We're going to be looking more into that later on. If you get into studying conspiracy theories, there's a conspiracy theory for almost every concept you can come up with. There's even one that discusses the flat earth. Just like the birds aren't real conspiracy, the claim that the earth is flat sounds like a pure joke. But unlike the birds theory, this one didn't even start out as satire. Folks really did believe that the earth is flat. Prior to scientific revelations confirming the roundness of the globe, this idea was quite common. Most myths and religions around the world, for example, suggest the world was a flat set of land, was rested on an enormous ocean, which likely terminated at some undisclosed location. Most creation stories from most religions, in fact, start off with a tale of some sort of primordial water prior to the creation of land that humans and animals lived on, and it was the creator of the creators, if you believe in more than one God, who then began fashioning land out of this primordial watery chaos. Well, the ancients had no way of understanding the concept of outer space and how stars and planets formed in the vacuum of space. They simply looked around them and saw land and water. With their limited understanding, they figured the water is likely the most fundamental element, which was in place prior to the creation of everything else. The Greeks talked about these primordial waters, as did the ancient Chinese. You could even say that Judaism and Christianity also echoed the concept, because the Old Testament of the Bible speaks of how in the beginning the Spirit of the Lord hovered over the waters. Doesn't mention whether the earth is flat or round, but once again, you've got the notion of primordial water. Likely due to the simple fact that the ancient peoples had no way of knowing they stood upon a sphere of a planet which floats in an empty vacuum of outer space, held together by its own gravity, but simultaneously spins and gets pulled along by a star's gravity, locked into an orbit around that star. Talking about the sun, don't you know? Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow and talk about more stories that are strange and unusual. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a truly great evening.